The Dalai Lama has been used because of politics. They have given him so much publicity in the newspapers, and probably that all is due to the American media. They play up the Dalai Lama because of politics with China. They want to make him appear like a victim of China's inhumane policies. So they always give a lot of publicity to the Dalai Lama. Actually, the Dalai Lama is only the head of the Gelugpa sect in Tibetan Buddhism. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are 4 sects: the Gelugpa sect, the Nyingma sect, the Kagyupa sect, and the Sakyapa sect. And each one of these has got a head. And our Dalai Lama is only the head of one sect only. So he doesn't represent very many followers, even in Tibet, even in Tibetan Buddhism. So how can he represent the rest of the world Buddhists, right? So in the same way, like our Chief Reverend in Brickfields, Kuala Lumpur, sometimes they report him as the Chief High Priest of Malaysia and Singapore. That is also terribly wrong. He is only the Chief Priest for the Siam Nikaya. In Sri Lanka, there are 3 main sects. The Siam Nikaya, whose monks are mainly from the high caste. Then you have the Amarapura Nikaya. And then you have the Ramanya Nikaya. Now, Terrible Chief Dhammananda, he doesn't even represent the Amarapura sect or the Ramanya sect. He only represents the Siam Nikaya. And he cannot speak on behalf of the monks who come from the Burmese tradition or the Thai tradition. So some people don't know because they read in the newspaper that he's the Chief High Priest of Malaysia and Singapore, and they assume that he can speak for all the monks. He cannot. He can only speak for those few Siam Nikaya monks in Malaysia and Singapore, which is only a handful. Another question here is, if we can't change past life karma, why do we keep looking back to the past life? Actually, our life, very much of our life is decided by our past karma. For example, where we are born, what type of family we are born into, whether our body is beautiful or ugly, whether we are sickly or healthy, whether our life is long or life is short. Many of these factors is dependent on past karma. However, not all of our life is dependent on past karma. If our life is totally dependent on past karma, then we can't do anything. Our life is already destined, right? But it is not. Maybe 60-70% of our life is determined by past karma. Maybe for some people 90% who are not active. But if you strive and you make a lot of effort, that present karma that you create now can change your life. Can change your life. For example, because of not very good karma, our Lo Bun Siu had a low position in life when he was younger. He was poor. He was a foreman. Only a foreman. But because he was very hardworking and quite honest, he impressed the Japanese. So, because he was so hardworking and the Japanese liked him so much, they gave him that dealership for Honda. And from there he became a very rich man. So he changed his life because of that karma that he created in this life. So whatever karma that has occurred in the past, we cannot change, and we don't even know What we can do now is strive very hard to create new karma. But the problem is, most people, we don't make the effort. So, most people, your life can be read on the palms of your hand. You can go to somebody who is very good at palm reading. They can tell you exactly what is going to happen to you. But they say you can never read the palm of a cultivator. You cannot read his palm. Why? Because a person who is striving in the holy path, he's changing his karma, he's changing his character. And because a cultivator is changing his character drastically, even the lines on his hand can change. That's why a fortune teller won't read a monk's hand. Well, if you practice vipassana, you don't want to get jhana, right? And if you don't get jhana, you're not going to know your past life. You can only know your past life because of concentration. If your concentration is good, then slowly your memory comes back. A lot of people practice, but they don't bother to study the suttas. I ask you, what is sati? If I ask you what is sati, most people will say mindfulness. Yeah? The Buddha never said sati is mindfulness. In 9 suttas, the Buddha defined sati. And how did he define sati? He said a person who has sati remembers what was said and done a long time ago. A person who has sati remembers what was said and done a long time ago. Sati has to do with remembering. It has nothing to do with mindfulness. Mindfulness actually is another word, sampajanya. In the suttas, the Buddha said, a person who has sampajanya, when he walks, he knows he's walking. When he's sitting, he knows he's sitting. When he stretches his arm, he knows he's stretching his arm. When he eats, he knows he's eating, etc. That is sampajanya. But sati has to do with the quality of remembering. Why? Firstly, you must know, this is coming into meditation, another sensitive topic. What is the type of meditation praised by the Buddha? Do you all know? I think you all don't study the suttas, that's why you don't know. In the Majjhima Nikaya, Venerable Ananda was asked, what is the type of meditation praised by the Buddha? And Venerable Ananda said, the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana. And that is the type of meditation praised by the Buddha. And that is Buddhist meditation. That alone is Buddhist meditation. What is mindfulness? Some people say they want to practice mindfulness. You don't need to practice mindfulness. Why? Because you are mindful all the time. I assure you that you are mindful all the time. But what is the problem? The problem is sometimes you are mindful of the wrong thing. For example, here I am teaching the Dhamma. You should be mindful of what I am saying. But sometimes your mind runs to your office. So you are mindful of your office problems. Sometimes your mind runs to your family problems. And you are mindful of your family problems. But you are still mindful, isn't it? Yes? Because that is pulling your attention. So whatever comes to your attention, you are mindful. You are mindful every moment of the day. Unfortunately, very often, you are not mindful of the right thing. That is why you have to practice sati. Sati is remembering. Why remember? You have to remember to practice the right thing. To remember the right thing, to be mindful of the right thing. And what is the right thing to be mindful of? Buddha said the body, the nature of the body, the feelings, the mind, and Dhamma. Dhamma is the teachings of the Buddha. And that is the most important, the teachings of the Buddha. Why? In the suttas, the Buddha said, there are 5 occasions when a person is liberated. You see, these basic things, if you don't know, how can you practice meditation? How to get liberated also you don't know. How can you say you're practicing meditation? What are these 5 occasions when you are liberated? The Buddha said, one is listening to the Dhamma. Second time is teaching the Dhamma. The third time is repeating the Dhamma. The fourth occasion is reflecting on the Dhamma. And the fifth occasion you get liberated is during meditation, when you are reflecting on the Samadhi Nimitta. And then, after that, you get liberated. So you see, out of these 5 occasions, when a person gets liberated, 4 of them have to do with Dhamma. So actually, if you study the suttas more, like I have done, you may come to the conclusion, like I do, that vipassana has nothing to do with meditation. Vipassana in Chinese is called Quan. Samatha vipassana in Chinese is Chir, Quan. Chir is stilling the mind, tranquility, meditation. And vipassana is Quan, contemplation. And Quan means these 4 things. Listening to the Dhamma, teaching the Dhamma, reflecting on the Dhamma, and repeating the Dhamma. Vipassana meditation was created by Mahasi Sayadaw about 30 years ago. 50 years ago, nobody heard of Vipassana meditation. You realize that? 50 years ago, 100 years ago, nobody heard of Vipassana meditation. Just like 50 years ago, nobody heard of Yiquan Tao, Gen Tao. Now they have formed Yiquan Tao. They say that is Buddhism. Can it be? Can Yiquan Tao be Buddhism? They just started only now. So, Sati means remembering to put your mindfulness in the right place. And the right place is these 4 objects. So for example, if you are practicing breath meditation, then you try to always, whenever your mind is able to, for example, if you are working in the office, you can't meditate at all, right? But if you are not working, you're not busy with something, then remember to put your mindfulness on one of these 4 objects. Now some people think Sati and Satipatthana is the same, but there is a difference between Sati and Satipatthana. Satipatthana means intense state of recollection or intense state of mindfulness. Why intense? Because in the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha gave a parable, a simile, on how to practice Satipatthana. This parable goes like this. The Buddha said, one day, the most beautiful girl of the country came up. And then all the men saw, and they clapped their hands. And maybe the girls also clapped their hands and shouted, the most beautiful girl of the country. And that attracted more people. So more people came out and clapped and shouted, the most beautiful girl of the country. And then some people asked her to sing and dance. So she started to sing and dance. And people clapped their hands and more people came out to see and to hear her singing and dancing. Then the Buddha said, an ordinary guy came along. This ordinary guy, meaning that he is a person who does not like to suffer, who likes to live. And then the soldiers caught him. and having caught him, they forced him to carry a bowl of oil. And this bowl of oil was filled to the brim, to the very brim. And they told him, now you carry this bowl of oil in between the great crowd of people who are crying and cheering the most beautiful girl of the land. And I'm going to walk behind you, the soldier said, with an uplifted sword. If you cause even one drop of oil to spill, I'm going to chop off your head. So the Buddha said, now this man, fearing for his life, he has to walk with this bowl full of oil in between the great crowd of people. Does he dare to look at the most beautiful girl of the land? Does he dare to look left and right? So he just has to concentrate on this bowl, nothing else. He has to walk every moment. His attention must be on the bowl, otherwise his life will be gone. Yeah, that is how to practice Satipatthana in the sutta. Concentrate on one object to the exclusion of everything else. Don't say when sound comes, note the sound. Don't even bother to note. Just concentrate on your object of meditation. Why? Because in another sutta, the Buddha said, a skillful monk who practices Satipatthana will attain one pointedness of mind, meaning jhana. If a monk is not skillful, he practices Satipatthana, he will not end up with jhana, one pointedness of mind. Why is it so important to attain jhana, one pointedness of mind? Because in the suttas, the Buddha said, when a person attains the jhanas, he cuts down the 5 hindrances. He may not have pulled out the roots, but he has cut down the 5 hindrances, just like you cut down lalang. If you are walking and there's a lot of tall lalang, it's obstructing your path, right? You find it difficult to walk. But if you cut down that lalang, it's free and easy to walk. So in the same way, the Buddha said, we have delusion, we are stupid because we cannot see things clearly. And why is it we cannot see things clearly? Because of the 5 hindrances. Sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry and doubt. These 5 things envelop us so that we cannot see things as they really are. And the only way to get rid of these 5 hindrances is to attain jhana. Now after a person attains jhana, the next thing he has to do, actually whether before or after he attains jhana, he should study the suttas all the time. Now if a person does not attain jhana and he listens to the Dhamma, listens to the 4 noble truths, the chances are that he is going to gain stream entry, the first path. And in the suttas, if you attain the first path before you die, it might be immediately, it might be 1 year later, it might be 10 years later, it might be 20 years later, but the latest, before the stream enterer dies, he will become a sotapanna, a first fruit attainer. In other words, the path will turn to fruit in the same lifetime. So, if a person has not attained jhana and he listens to the Dhamma, if he listens to the 4 noble truths, he will attain stream entry. But if a person has attained jhana and he listens to the same Dhamma, he will either become an anagamin or an arahant. That's the difference. So if you study the Vinaya books, you will find that the first 1,000 over arahants of the Buddha, the first 1,000 over arahants mentioned in the Vinaya books, all of them attain arahanthood by listening to the Buddha's discourse. All of them. Not a single one by meditation. Okay, I tell you. We start off with the first one. The first one the Buddha decided to teach was the 5 monks, the 5 bhikkhus. And those 5 monks had been following the Buddha for many years. And having followed the Buddha for many years, I would assume that the Buddha, having learned jhana, would have taught them jhana, all the stages of jhana. So when the Buddha was enlightened, the Buddha came to them and told them to sit down. I will teach you the Dhamma. The first discourse the Buddha taught was the Dhamma Chakka Pavatana Sutta, the turning of the Dhamma wheel. Out of the 5 monks, one of them, hearing that, was Kondanya. He was the first one to become a stream enterer. And then for the next few days, the Buddha kept teaching them the Dhamma day after day. And it is mentioned in the Vinaya books, the 5 monks plus the Buddha, 6 of them. Sometimes 2 of them will go and beg for food to feed all the 6. Sometimes 3 of them will go and beg for food to feed all 6. But every day the Buddha taught them the suttas. And after teaching them the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, all the 5 of them became arahants. Now after these 5 arahants, the Buddha looked around. The next person he wanted to teach was Yasa. Yasa was the son of a very rich man in that town. And he was enjoying life. He had 4 beautiful wives. And every day he was living a life of luxury. He had so many slaves. They would dance and sing for him. And every day he will look at them, enjoy their music, maybe get drunk. And then at night they will entertain him until he falls asleep at night. So when they see the master having fallen asleep and they are so tired, they also all fell asleep around him. So the Buddha probably used his psychic power. In the middle of the night, this Yasa woke up. And when Yasa woke up, he looked at all the slaves around him, half naked, in sleep. Some saliva flowing out of their mouth, their hair all disheveled, and half naked bodies. And because he must have been a cultivator in the past life, and I believe the Buddha chose people like him because in the previous life he must have attained jhana. So one look at all the slaves, he was repelled because he must have contemplated death, must have contemplated corpses in the previous life. So it reminded him of corpses. So this feeling of dukkha arose in him. Dukkha. So he didn't want to see, he walked out of the house. And then the Buddha must have used his psychic power to draw him. He kept walking and came to the city gates. You know, city gates normally are locked at night, but the city gates open by themselves. So he walked out of the city gates and he walked into the forest where the Buddha was waiting for him. And when he came to the Buddha said, Yasa, sit down here. There is no dukkha here. So when he heard there is no dukkha, he gladly sat down. Then the Buddha preached to him the graduated discourse on the 4 Noble Truths. Hearing it the first time, he attained stream entry. So he stayed with the Buddha. Then the next morning, his parents were very sick. They looked all around, they couldn't find him. So his father went looking for him. And along the way found his slippers. So his father kept walking until he came to the Buddha. And Yasa was sitting next to the Buddha. But the Buddha used his psychic power to shield Yasa, so that Yasa's father could not see Yasa. So Yasa's father asked the Buddha whether he had seen Yasa. And the Buddha said, sit down here. Maybe in a short while you will see Yasa. So when he heard that, he thought there's a chance he's going to see Yasa, and he sat down. Then the Buddha taught him the same graduated discourse. And upon hearing it the first time, he became a stream enterer. And Yasa, hearing it the same discourse, second time became an Arahant. You see, just listening to the Dhamma, never asked Yasa to meditate, just listening, became an Arahant. So, after that, Yasa's father could see Yasa, the Buddha lifted his psychic power. Then he asked Yasa to go home. He said, your mother is worried sick for you. Then the Buddha told his father, he said, Yasa is no more the same person, hinting that Yasa had already become enlightened. So his father understood. So his father did not persuade him to go back. So he renounced. So after he renounced, his close friends, there were 54 of them, must have been his fellow companions in the holy life, in the previous holy life. So when they heard that he renounced, they thought, fantastic, the richest man in town, the son, the richest family in town can renounce and become a monk, in spite of having 4 wives and all. So they thought his teacher must be very special. So they all came to see him. When they came to see him, I don't know whether all together or one by one, he brought them to see the Buddha. In the same way, when the Buddha discoursed to them, one by one all the 54 became Arahants. Just by listening to the Dhamma, all became Arahants. So Yasa and his friends made up of 55, plus the first 5 monks, the first 5 Arahants, 60. When there were 60 Arahants, the Buddha asked them to walk and teach the Dhamma to the world. He said, don't 2 of you walk by the same road, go by different roads and preach the Dhamma for the happiness of God, of humans and devas. So they went to preach the Dhamma. Then after that, the Buddha contemplated whom should he teach next. Ascetics living by the side of the Ranjara river. And these ascetics were jatilas, matted hair ascetics. And they worshipped the fire. They had wrong view. But why the Buddha wanted to teach them? Because they practiced jhana. And because they practiced jhana, the leader probably had psychic power. Some psychic power. And because of that, he believed that he was an Arahant. So the Buddha went to live with them. And during a period of a few weeks, the Buddha slowly showed his psychic power to them. For example, one night, the 4 great heavenly kings came in the middle of the night to visit the Buddha and pay respect to the Buddha. Of course, the Buddha must have used his psychic power to make them come. So these ascetics, they could see this bright light coming to visit the Buddha. And after that, go away. So the next morning they asked the Buddha, who are those devas who came to see you? Then the Buddha said, oh, the 4 great heavenly kings. They came to pay respect and to ask questions. Then this ascetic thought, wow, this Samana is great. 4 great heavenly kings also can come and worship him. But then the leader thought, no, this Samana might be great, but he's not an Arahant like me. So another night, Saka Devaraja came, brighter still, made the whole place bright. And after visiting the Buddha, he left. Next morning again they asked, and then when they heard was Saka Devaraja, they were even more impressed. Then another night, Brahma, great Brahma came, lighting up the whole place. And they were even more impressed. So, like another time, because they were impressed with him, this chief of the ascetics, in the morning, every morning he'll come and invite the Buddha for breakfast. So the Buddha said, you go first, Kassapa, I'll join you. So Kassapa, the ascetic, he walked to the dining hall. By the time he reached the dining hall, he saw the Buddha sitting there. And the Buddha was holding a flower for him. And the Buddha offered the flower to him. And he looked at the flower. I've never seen this flower before. And the Buddha said, yes, it's from the Tavatimsa heaven. I just went to Sakadeva Raja's heaven and brought back this coral flower just for you. Then he thought, wow, this Samana, Great, huh? He can go to heaven and come back before I can even reach the dining hall. So in this way, after a period of a few weeks, they were so impressed by the Buddha, and then the Buddha gave him a slap in the face. How? The Buddha said, Kasapa, you've been thinking all the time you're an Arahant, but you're not an Arahant, and you're not walking the path to become an Arahant. Nobody had given him this slap before. You woke him up now. And he started thinking, yeah, this samana must be greater than me. So he decided to shave his hair like the Buddha and become a follower of the Buddha. So when his disciples saw that now, every one of them did the same. 1,000 of them became disciples of the Buddha. So the Buddha accepted them as monk disciples. After that, only the Buddha taught them the Dhamma. And the Buddha taught them one sutta only. Hearing one sutta, all 1,000 of them became Arahants. See how fantastic. The Buddha never asked them to meditate. Buddha just asked them to listen. I will teach you the Dhamma. Listen carefully. So they listened carefully and all 1,000 became Arahants. After that, the Buddha brought them to see King Bimbisara. King Bimbisara at that time was the king of Magadha. So, King Bimbisara threw a large dana for all of them and invited all the people of Rajagaha to come out and pay respect to the Buddha and his Arahant disciples. So according to the Vinaya books, about 120,000 people came. 120,000 people came. So after the dana, the Buddha preached this graduated discourse on the Four Noble Truths to all of them. And according to the Vinaya book, all of them attained stream entry. All of them. So you see, stream entry is attained by listening to the Dhamma, basically on the Four Noble Truths. There is a sutta where it is mentioned that there was a person who used to drink and then he passed away, but he was a follower of the Buddha. And after he passed away, they came to ask the Buddha, what is his fate? Where has he gone for rebirth? And the Buddha said, don't worry about, what's his name? Sarakani. The Buddha said, he was a stream winner, a Sotapanna. So when some people heard that Sarakani, the drinker, was a Sotapanna, the Buddha said, he got very annoyed. How can a kaki bottle also become a Sotapanna? They started to doubt, started to criticize the Buddha. So word came back to the Buddha. You know what the Buddha said? Why shouldn't Sarakani become a stream enterer, a stream winner? The Buddha said, Sarakani has been learning the Dhamma for a long time and he has been practicing the Dhamma. The Buddha said, why? Even if I taught these trees the Dhamma, they also will become stream winners. The Buddha said, even if I taught the Dhamma to trees, if they can listen, they also will become stream winners. So you see, stream winning is from listening to the Dhamma, not by meditation. But if you want to go higher, second fruit, third fruit, fourth fruit, you must meditate, but not the first fruit. Of course, if you can meditate as well, then the chances of becoming a stream winner are even more. But the emphasis is on listening to the Dhamma. That is why the Buddha called all his disciples, whether monk disciples or nun or lay person disciples or what, call them savakas, hearers of his Dhamma. If you don't hear the Buddha's Dhamma, you are not a disciple of the Buddha.